Welcome to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I'm Asher Scott Myers, screenwriter and blogger over at sellingyourscreenplay.com. In this episode's main segment, I'm going to be interviewing screenwriter and novelist Doug Richardson. He's written some big action movies, including Die Hard 2, Bad Boys, and Money Train, among many others. He's got some great stories about breaking in and working in the business. The way he broke in is pretty straightforward, and although he broke in many years ago, what he did could work today just as much as it did back then. So pay special attention to that. If you find this episode valuable, please help me out by giving me a review in iTunes. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, please give it a like and leave a comment. I want to improve this podcast, so some honest, constructive feedback is very much appreciated. Please also share these podcast episodes with anyone who you think could get some value out of them. I'd like to thank Chuck Kinahan, who left me a nice review in iTunes. Thanks, Chuck. And I'd like to thank the folks who left me some nice comments over on YouTube, too. Thank you, Carla McNeese, Alex Fielding, Leon Brumby, and Constance Nunn. Thanks to everyone who left a comment. It is very much appreciated. A couple of quick notes. Any websites or links that I mention in the podcast can be found on my blog in the show notes. I also publish a transcript with every episode in case you'd rather read the show or look at something later on. You can find all the podcast show notes at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/podcasts. Also, if you want my free guide, How to Sell a Screenplay in 5 Weeks, you can pick that up by going to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. It's completely free. You just put in your email address and I'll send you a new lesson once per week for 5 weeks along with a bunch of bonus lessons. I teach the whole process of how to sell your screenplay in that guide, how to write a professional logline and query letter, how to find agents, managers, and producers who are looking for material. It really is everything you need to know to sell your screenplay. Just go to sellingyourscreenplay.com/guide. A quick few words about what I'm currently working on. I've mentioned my one location female protagonist sexy thriller screenplay before. Last November, I optioned it to a producer. It was basically a free 90-day option with the understanding that if she could find a director she liked for the project, she would more formally option the script and pay me some money for the option. Well, it looks like that's actually moving forward. It ended up being a free 5-month option, but she has found a good director for the project. This is pretty typical of the sorts of projects that I get involved in. There is a lot of waiting around and wondering if anything is ever going to materialize. The producer is very good and has some solid credit, so I'm glad things are progressing. Now, though, the real waiting game begins as she goes out and tries to raise the money. That's the real tough part about independent filmmaking, and the process can take a long time, sometimes many, many years. So I've got my fingers crossed. She said she was going to make a more formal announcement about the project, so hopefully I'll be able to announce that in the next episode. Also, I'm almost done with my low-budget horror thriller screenplay. I actually feel like this might be one of the most, if not the most, marketable screenplays I've ever written, so I have high hopes for it. I'm presenting the screenplay to my writers group April 15th, so after that I should have some good notes and be able to make the final tweaks to the screenplay and blast it out towards the end of April. Wish me luck on that. So now let's get into the main segment. Today, I'm talking with screenwriter and novelist Doug Richardson. He's very open about his experiences breaking in and then working as a screenwriter. So it's a fascinating interview. Here it is. Welcome, Doug, to the Selling Your Screenplay podcast. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
I really appreciate being asked. Thank you.
So to start out, I wonder if you can just give us a quick overview of your screenwriting background, how you got into the entertainment business, and just some of your career accomplishments.
Wow, that's just, such a broad question, but how I got into it, this, age-old story, movie brat, loved kids. As a kid, loved movies, would watch them wherever I could, would sneak away to my local mall and skip between theaters. I'd cut school, essentially, and go watch movies, because that was before DVDs and, video and stuff like that. So that's how I got into loving movies. I wanted to make movies. I went to film school. That's an old story. And after film school, I began to write my way to directing. Most of the directors I really admired, or at least many of whom had written before, and I thought that would be the best way to direct. So I began writing, and essentially became a writer, and decided not to be a director. So that's the story, and there's nothing really sexy or romantic about it. It's just the writing kind of stuck, and I liked it.
So I wonder if you can maybe dig in a little bit as far as the specifics. So you were in film school, you wrote a couple spec scripts. What was like literally the logistics of getting that first break, getting that first agent, getting that first writing assignment? What was that?
Yeah. Okay. The logistics of it were, out of film school, I did the starving artist thing and worked, odd jobs.
You were in L.A. Was the film school in L.A.? So you were in L.A.
I went to USC.
Okay.
I went to USC back when it was, before it was the Palace, the actual film school palace that it is today. We were in these Quonset huts. I was in the school that George Lucas went to.
Okay.
When we were in these little tiny Quonset huts and this rundown little corner of the campus. But anyway, I went to film school. I got out of film school. I worked odd jobs. Anything I could do to pay the rent. This is advice I always give. And to maximize my time, at screenwriting, and developed and wrote quite a number of spec scripts. And then, with those, went out and hustled an agent. And the way I hustled an agent back then, I think it's a bit different now, was the Writers Guild, used to have they used to have this, as you enter the door to the Writers Guild, there was the reception desk, and they had this, to the right, they had this 1-inch thick pile of Xeroxes, essentially, that listed agents, all the agents that were signatory with the WGA. And that would be pretty much, that's what they did, because there were so many people who walked in every day and asked them about getting an agent, and the receptionist would point to the pile, and you'd grab that paper and leave.
Uh-huh.
So I had that piece of paper. That piece of paper was double-sided, printed with agents on both sides, and the agents were divided by these asterisks. Some had asterisks next to their names. Others did not. The ones with asterisks, I believe, there was a little note at the bottom that said, "These agents do not accept unsolicited material." Or they were the agents that did accept unsolicited material. They were the smaller group of agents. Most of the agents on there did not accept unsolicited material. But good news for me, each of those agents, no matter if they accepted unsolicited material or not, had a telephone number. I decided that at that point, that at least my guess was, most of the agents that didn't accept unsolicited material were probably the better agents. So I focused entirely on calling them instead of the ones that did accept unsolicited material. And I gathered whatever boyish charm that I had and called every damn one of them. And there was over 100 or so. And would do my best to keep whomever I could on the line until they thought I had either they'd agreed to read my script as a way of getting me off the phone, or they agreed to read my script because, I showed them something. And then they said, send us your screenplay before the time of emailing PDFs.
Sure.
Send us your screenplay in a self-addressed stamped envelope, and we will read it.
I remember those days too, believe me.
Yeah, okay. They gave me their addresses, where to send them, and once again I said I don't want I now want to put a face with the voice on the phone, so I hand-delivered the scripts. Also, frankly, you know what? I couldn't afford the postage. It was cheaper for me to drive around in my little, Pudmobile.
Mm-hmm.
So I convinced maybe 15 to 20 agents to read my stuff, hand-delivered each and every one. So I just stick around the office as long as I could so they could get a look at me and, get a read on me.
And were you able to get past the receptionist and actually talk to the agents when you showed up with your script?
No, I wasn't. But they were small agencies, some of them. Some were mom and pop, some were little boutiques. And it wasn't that if I was able to get past the receptionist, the distance between the receptionist and the agent's door was very short, and the door was often open.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just, I'd made my, the agent would be on the phone, but if he wasn't on the phone, I would make myself known. Nice to meet you. Please read my material. Thank you for reading it. And I was on my way. And I got 5 calls of people who wanted to sign me after that. Because, in the end, your script's got to stay something. Mm-hmm. And there was at least enough there in my writing that made them want to either have a second meeting and or sign me. And that's how I got my first agent.
Perfect. So, a couple questions about that. First off, I think that method actually still really works. I think nowadays, I've never been good at cold calling or sales, and I actually hired someone to do some cold calls for me, and and they actually did. It was really amazing it was amazing what kind of percentage they can get in. So I actually think cold calling is a great thing because nowadays, everyone just thinks, oh, I'll send an email, and they think that's enough. And I think if someone, had the salesmanship to do cold calls, it is actually still a very, very effective way to do it. A couple questions. How many specs?
It is still always better to interface with people personally.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
If you possibly can. I mean, I will always try and have. I don't like phone pitching. I don't like. I accept. Certain kinds of conference calls when projects are down the line, but it's always better to be in the room with someone. So much more gets accomplished, and there's so much more in our, in that unspoken body language between people that tells you what they're hearing from you, tells them what you're giving off. So whatever you do, I always tell people to kind of please find a way to meet them.
Absolutely, yeah.
Let them know that you're a human being and not someone hiding, behind, a social media account.
Mm-hmm. So a couple questions about the pitching. You had, you mentioned you had written many specs at this time. Did you have one that you thought was your best, so you pitched that one spec to all 100 of these agents, or did you have a couple of different ones you were pitching? What was sort of the...
I didn't pitch a single story. I just said, hi, this is who I am. I just went to this school, and I know that probably doesn't mean a hill of beans to you, but I've written a couple of screenplays. I would like you to read one of them, and, I think they're really good. I don't remember specifically what I said or how I said it. It was obviously
off the cuff.
Some kind of a kitchen sink approach that just to keep them on the phone to the point where I could get them to agree to read it. At that point, I wasn't pitching any story. They weren't saying, what is the script about? And thank God, by the way, they didn't ask me to tell them the story. Mm-hmm. Not that the stories were bad. I hadn't a clue how to pitch, and that was something I had to learn.
Sure. So do you remember just roughly how many specs had you written? Because that's always something I feel like a lot of new writers, they've written one script and they're like ready to go out and start pitching. And I'm like, well, maybe you should get a couple more scripts under your belt. How many scripts do you think you had written before you started really actively pitching them like this?
I mean,
just roughly.
3. I think I'd written 3 specs.
Okay.
At that time, I felt at that time I needed more than just one script. I needed them to see, and it wasn't like I needed 3 different genres. I think they just needed to see I wasn't a one-trick pony.
Mm-hmm. So then you have 5 agents that would like to sign you, and then how did you decide which of the 5 to go with?
I met with all of them, and I actually had no clue which one to go with, so I sought advice from an old friend who had some showbiz knowledge. Was a guy who used to was a commercial artist, but he was an artist. He was the only artist I really knew, who understood anything about showbiz. But at least I knew he'd dealt with reps before, and he just was very simple. He said, "Who sounded the most interested in you, and who was the first to call you?" And he says, because most likely they're the ones who like you the most, who are the hungriest. Mm-hmm. And that was this old guy named Harry Bloom, who was an old MCA agent who had a little one man and his wife boutique office on Sunset Boulevard. And he repped a few people in his day, was, kind of being shown the door, the showbiz door, but sort of refusing to leave, and knew enough people to sort of, get a kid in the room. So it was a great character when I sat down with him, the first time I sat down with him. First of all, he apologized for the Sunset Boulevard office because he wanted to tell me about his former Century City office. This little old Jewish agent, sweetest guy, and he stood behind his desk and he said, "Do you know what was great about that Century City office?" And I said, "What?" And he says, "On one corner there was Bank of America, and on the other corner was Wells Fargo, and then on another corner there was this bank." And I think he thought that was going to impress me. I always thought that was weird. But there was something strange about it that I thought was really, really cool. And based on my friend's advice, he was definitely the most interested in signing me, which means he was the one who was going to be the most interested in then doing something with me. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
So that was I made the right choice.
Yeah. So I assume you're not still with him?
No, unfortunately. And I wouldn't. You should. I have a blog that your listeners should go to. I write a weekly blog on my It's not an advice column as much as it's just my adventures in the screen trade, my own version of it, my trench tales, all of which are true, and some of which you just can't believe that actually happened. It's DougRichardson.com. So anyway,
yeah, I'll link to that.
Should go there. Yes, thank you. And I did write a blog about essentially how not to fire an agent, because I did it the wrong way. But I eventually had to let poor Harry go because there was a limit to what he was able to do for me. As a writer, I was ready to move to the next level, so to speak, and he couldn't pull it off. I gave him a chance. He tried, but it became painfully clear that he was, he was and should have been retired. So I was probably his last working client. Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to that. So you signed with him, and then what was he able to do, sort of in those initial stages? Get you some meetings, get your spec.
Get me in the room to meet people who he'd had relationships with, people who he could get on the phone. Mm-hmm. Some low grade, some TV movie guys, and a couple of small production companies, nothing studio related. And like I said, I'm glad I didn't have to pitch over the phone because I was a horrible pitcher. I remember my initial pitches were just, must have been tiresome. Unless these people I pitched to must have shown the greatest amount of patience while this kid showed up in a room and did this A to Z pitch. Yeah, not very artful, but he was able to get a guy named Bob Shapiro on the phone, who at that time had just left being president of Warner Brothers, president of production, and was stepping into a nice, sit down production deal. And this particular former executive who became a producer was another old school guy who Harry sort of knew from way back when, and maybe owed Harry some kind of favor. And he sat down with me and read my stuff and signed me to a deal. So that was enough.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of a deal was like? Writing some of his ideas?
I pitched something a little bit better than I had before. And I had a couple of those spec scripts. But he was kind of an old school guy. He wanted, as almost the last piece of his little deal at Warner Brothers, or it wasn't so little deal at Warner Brothers, he wanted an old fashioned Hollywood deal where he had a screenwriter on a weekly paycheck, on a weekly deal, an old style WGA studio contract, where I was assigned to write for the studio and I was assigned to work for him and generate projects for him. And I mean, it was, and for me, it was more money than I ever seen in my entire life, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great job for a new writer, just to be grinding pages out and working on all kinds of different stuff.
What was so great about it is I call it the Robert Shapiro Graduate Screenwriting Program, because I got an office, I got a parking space, and I got incredible latitude to watch and learn and meet all other kinds of people who were in the business, pick their brain on how they got stuff done, and pretty much as long as Bob liked the idea, we didn't have to pitch the story to the studio first. Bob was able to say, I like that idea, go write it. Because I was just on it. He didn't want to go through this process of deal making before you ever, write something. He wanted someone who was getting paid to write. So I got the green light very quickly based on whims and ideas to just write movies.
Mm-hmm. Were these his ideas or your ideas or a combination of the two?
My ideas. He had no ideas.
Okay.
He had no ideas. He just had this idea that if he had a young writer, just to see what would happen if they wrote every day. So I would go in the office and I would write these movies. I was getting paid to write spec scripts, essentially. Yeah.
And how many did you end up writing over this period?
Over this 2-year period? Oh God. What was it? 3 or 4.
Okay. And did any of them ever get?
And a lot of drafts and stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
Nothing got traction at Warner Brothers. Part of which was he had a lot of big things going on. He was making Pee-wee's Big Adventure. He was making Empire of the Sun with Steven Spielberg. He had a lot of big management things. I was not. I actually became kind of this afterthought, which was wonderful for me, because I got all I had to do was work with whoever was his development director at that time, and I got to work and write stuff. And though nothing ever happened at Warner Brothers with my stuff, because it just never got any of their attention. The last thing I did write while I was there, he apparently was able to, within the purview of the deal, or maybe there was some shenanigans that went on, he was able to essentially keep it from the studio and set it up elsewhere.
Okay.
And that movie got traction, and that movie almost got made about 50 times.
Huh.
But that was sort of the next move out of Warner Brothers.
Okay. So
but
then
it was an amazing experience.
Yeah, no, that's...
I had George Roy Hill and his crew right across from our office, Dick Donner and his people across from the office, Irwin Winkler. For a while, I was in Irwin Winkler's suite of offices. Because somehow they decided they needed my closet, which was my first office there. It was an actual renovated closet, but it was my office. It was great. I didn't care.
Yeah.
And then they needed it for a production component, so suddenly I was moved to the building across the way, and I was in Irwin Winkler's empty office for almost a year. So I had this fantastic, massive office.
Uh-huh. Huh. So, okay, so that goes on for 2 years, and then what kind of, your boss, his deal ends with Warner Brothers, and Sue, you go with him, or you at that point...
His deal didn't end with Warner Brothers. My deal ended. I got paid for 2 years, and it was great, and out of which came a script that he felt he could make, and we moved on. At that time, there was a company called New World Pictures. They were known for making a lot of kind of low-budget, kind of crummy movies, and they just gotten a bunch of money from a couple of sources, and they were starting to make some more upscale kind of projects, not on a big budget, but the screenplay I'd written called Honor Bright was loved by them, and they bought it, and we started developing it with different directors, and for one of those many reasons that, one after the other, those many reasons why movies don't go forward, it kept getting a director attached. We would do drafts. It would get, we would be in prep. We would start casting, and then the director would go off and take another movie, and then it would fall apart, and then it would come back together. Essentially over the course of the next couple of years, there were 4. I spent almost all my time. I spent half my time, at least, not all my time, half my time working on that project with 4 different directors and 4 different start dates. While I moved on to another agent and was, getting some assignment work.
I see. Okay, so let's talk about that then. So this is the point where you finally fired your first agent and were able to get...
I'd fired him about I fired him about halfway through my deal at Warner Brothers.
Okay. And then the new agent was able to get you out, start taking some meetings and getting some assignments. What were some of the first assignments that you worked on?
Some of the first assignments were, unlike the assignments that we have today, there was a lot of assignments. There was a lot of development. So it was easy to make a living at it. There was a project at TriStar. There's a couple things at TriStar that I was, a rewrite, and then a project that started with a producer who had an idea, and I turned it into a movie, and and I filled that assignment. There was a spec script I wrote that I sold to MGM with a producer attached who had worked with, who was a development executive for Robert Shapiro, and I liked her a lot, and she had developed the script with me. Afterward, I sold that for a bunch of money. At least at that time, it was a bunch of money.
Sure.
And so I was very, very busy, in the development process for quite some time with a variety of projects.
Now, I'm just like, sort of this next question is sort of two-part question. I mean, so you're working on all these projects. Were you getting frustrated that nothing was actually getting made? And the second part of that is, did you feel like it might hurt your career that, yes, you're getting lots of work, but nothing is getting made, and ultimately that's kind of the prize as a screenwriter?
Well, I was still very young, and I was very well aware that there were a lot of writers out there because there was a lot of development money. I mean, the development money was 4 times the development dough that there is out there today. Mm-hmm. And they developed a lot more material and a lot greater variety of material. And so there was really no shame in being a writer, a young writer that was doing a lot of work, and at least in my opinion and in the opinions of others, really good work. But movies weren't getting made immediately. Directors were getting attached, falling in and out of projects. There was a lot of that going on. The only hard part for me was I was making a really, really good living, but I had this terrible dilemma of this terrible round and round conversation that would happen at, parties or any kind of social event where it's like, what do you do? Well, I'm a screenwriter. Really? What have you written? Well, nothing you've seen. Well, what do you mean nothing I've seen? Well, I write screenplays. I write movies, but my films haven't been made yet. Oh, really? So then what do you do for a living? Well, I write screenplays.
Yeah.
So it got to the point where I ended up developing over the years, a bulletproof lie, which I could tell people, which stopped the conversation, because I just did not want to be asked, what do you do for a living? I make this really good living. At that point I was able to, I'd made such a good living. I bought a house. I got married. I was, I was clearly living the life of, kind of someone young and successful without really having anything to show for it other than the bank account. Mm-hmm.
So what was the lie? What was the lie that you were telling at the parties once?
I don't divulge the lie.
Is that right? Sounds like a good one.
Today.
Is that right?
When I don't want to talk about what I do. Because what happens later is when you are produced in certain situations where you don't want to talk about what you do. What do you do? I'm a screenwriter. What have you written? And then you name the credits. Well, they've seen them or heard of them. They have an opinion about them. Mm-hmm. They want to know, they want to know what Bruce Willis is like, what Will Smith is like, there are times, which is most times for me, where I don't want to be the center of attention. So I'd rather talk about them or something else. So I still use the lie, and I will keep it to myself.
Yeah, there you go. So maybe just kind of keep the ball rolling, and so you're getting some assignment work, and then multiple projects are moving along, and then eventually you get onto Die Hard 2. Is that? It seems like that's a good project.
That's what happens.
Okay, and then that one obviously got made. How did you get onto Die Hard 2?
Die Hard 2 was a funny story, and it shows how smart some people can be at the time. Die Hard 3 Die Hard 3. Skipped way forward. Die Hard had been in theaters all of 3 weeks. When I got the call from Larry Gordon, who'd read my New World script on Right, and another script I'd read, this drama I'd written called Pravda. And they had me in on I had no idea what the meeting was about, because oftentimes you didn't know. They were going to pitch me something. And I went in, and Larry Gordon said, I just made this film called Die Hard. Have you seen it? And at that point, I'd seen it twice already. I was so impressed with the movie. And again, it had only been in theaters for 3 weeks. He says, well, here's the spot I'm in, okay? They're going to want a sequel. but they don't know they're going to want a sequel. They won't admit that they're going to want a sequel because the movie's only been in theaters 3 weeks. And when they want a sequel, because once the movie's a hit and now they then announce there's going to be a sequel, then it becomes this big giant bake-off where every writer in town, at least in that genre, and every agent in town who's got a writer in that genre, wants me to have a meeting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the process of developing Die Hard 2 becomes onerous and time-consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm listening to this whole thing. He says, so here's what I've got. I've got this book called 58 Minutes, by Walter Wager. And I think it's going to make a great Die Hard 2. What I want to do is, since you're an untested writer, your quote for how much you get paid is still pretty low studio-wise. And Larry was a former president of Fox, he's able to go into Fox with a book and me and say, here's a potential action franchise. Here's a kid who's not going to cost a whole lot. Let me make a deal with him to write this book. And that's what he said he wanted to do, is make a deal with me to write 58 Minutes, to adapt this movie as 58 Minutes. But I would know, and he would know, that what we were really doing is writing Die Hard 2.
I see.
I just changed the names of the characters.
Yeah, didn't search and replace once you need the sequel.
And it was search and replace wasn't such an easy thing back then. I think we were still writing programs in DOS. But anyhow, it was a brilliant move because he really knew how to get through the studio red tape, get his sequel to Die Hard rolling without anyone knowing he was writing a sequel to Die Hard. Not only that, Larry and also he didn't want to work with. At that point, he and Joel Silver weren't getting along very well, and Larry had brought Joel in to produce, to do the on point producing on Die Hard. So when a movie called Die Hard was about to go into development, Joel Silver suddenly was going to become involved, and Larry wanted to avoid that too. So it was all a very neat and brilliant package. It was a very easy deal for him to make. It was made in a matter of days. And I was off writing Die Hard 2, just no one knew it but Larry's company and me.
Mm-hmm.
And
did the movie,
sure enough, what?
I'm sorry, did the movie, and ultimately what turns out, it really is based on that 58 minutes, like a lot of the story and stuff came from that novel?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
No, it's primarily, there's not much of the book in it at all, but the book was a terrorist takeover of a major airport in a snowstorm.
Oh, I see.
And that was that's what Larry thought would make a great Die Hard 2.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, Leonard Goldberg left Fox as president, and Joe Roth came in. And Joe Roth's first order of business, by then, 14, 15 weeks later, I had a draft of Die Hard 2 called 58 Minutes, and Joe Roth came in, and his first order of business, since Die Hard had turned into a big hit, was, I want a sequel. And Larry Gordon said, guess what?
You already have it.
I have it. And that's how it got greenlit in a matter of days.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, that's
just brilliantly, it was a brilliant plot by Larry Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely brilliantly put together. There was no giant, steeplechase of writers, and agents trying to get on the movie.
Mm-hmm.
He just quietly developed it and had it ready to go. And not only that, if it wasn't the Die Hard they wanted to make, he had another makeable movie.
Mm-hmm.
So
perfect.
I'm still blown away at the thinking that went on there.
Yeah. So then, so that obviously is a big hit as well. So you get more more writing assignments and eventually get on to Bad Boys. How did that kind of come about?
Well, Bad Boys came about as with someone I'd worked with before. This guy named Lucas Foster at that time was developing for Simpson Bruckheimer. And they had all the behind-the-scenes wrangling that had gone on over this script that it was originally called Bulletproof Hearts, and Michael Bay was attached, this first-time director, and there was a version of it that they were going to be making. I don't know if they were going to be making it at Disney before it went to Columbia. I think it was, with John Lovitz and Dana Carvey, with Michael Bay attached. Swear to you, that was the movie.
Huh.
And then that fell apart, and they had pieces of the script that had been rewritten by a lot of people over the years since George Gallo had written the original Bulletproof Hearts. It had been 11 years since George had written it. And I get this call to come in, and I sat down with Jerry, and it was, okay, we got this hot commercial director, commercial and video director.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Will Smith and Martin Lawrence, who are about to go on a hiatus in 5 weeks. And we've got no scripts. But we've got a studio willing to sort of jump in.
So you had 5 weeks to basically pump out a draft.
We had 5 weeks to sort of figure it out, and that's when the madness began.
Huh.
And it was utter and complete madness. But it worked out.
Mm-hmm. What was
one of those things.
What's some of the madness you're talking about, just in terms of trying to piece together this script that had been rewritten numerous times?
It wasn't really a green light at Columbia at the time. First of all, Columbia thought they were also making, because they had Will and Martin, that they were making an urban movie, which at that time was polite speak for they were making a film aimed at a black audience.
Huh.
Which none of us thought we were doing. Again, I don't think we had a first-time director who really didn't know his way around the screenwriting process. Not that a lot of directors know their way around the screenwriting process. At least they know writers go off and do writing and then come back.
Mm-hmm.
Within a week of sort of coming up with a new story to sort of fit with the old story, which was the farce that was in the middle, the comedy farce that's in the middle of Bad Boys. Will and Martin wanted to be in an action movie. And Bulletproof Hearts was never an action movie. It was a comedy, just a farce comedy. And they wanted to be in an action movie. And again, we had this window to put these two guys together on screen. And once you met with Will and Martin, that was sort of the jumping off point where you sort of got there was something really great between them.
Uh-huh.
That was going to be fun. And
it's so funny in hindsight. You look at a movie like Bad Boys, and it seems so obvious. Obviously, at the time, those guys hadn't done action movies; they really hadn't done anything but TV. So it seemed now in hindsight, it seems such an obvious choice to put those guys together in a buddy comedy action movie. But I guess at the time,
yeah, it was. That's something that I think Lucas Foster saw. I mean, I think Jerry saw it too, but Lucas was the guy who sort of wisely, jackhammered that movie out of Disney and somehow got Columbia interested in it and got Will and Martin interested in the possibility of doing something fun. They knew with Michael Bay, based on his very zippy camera style, that the movie was going to look cool.
Mm-hmm.
They just wanted, and then they brought in a guy who knew how to write an action film. There's a line in the movie where Joe Pantoliano says to the two guys, says, "Do what you do, only faster." And that was my little homage to Jerry Bruckheimer, because that's what he told me when I saw the schedule. I said, how am I supposed to do it that day? We've got 5 weeks. He says, just do what you do, only faster. It was that simple. And so I would joke about that, because I was supposed to write the movie, and then they were going to go take the movie, and within 5 or 6 days, because the deal was made in 24 hours, within 5 days of trying to kind of piece a new movie together, and we were dealing with cards on the wall of my living room, and Michael unable to understand what a transition was, and such. Jerry just called and said, "You just have to go to, you all have to just go to Miami. Just whatever you do, just go to Miami and get it going down there. Mm-hmm. You can't do it in LA." We had this terrible meeting at Columbia where I was supposed to go in and pitch the movie that was not yet formed. And I think that was their plan, just to get us all out of town. And so we were sent down to, we were just flown to Miami, and they said, go make a movie.
One thing
it came together.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes when you only have a little bit of time, those are the best situations, because nobody can, get in there and mess it up. They don't have time to mess it up.
That's true, but usually it's disastrous.
Yeah.
We have to admit too, when you make a movie that way, usually it's a mess. Mm-hmm. Bad Boys, there's a lot of good stuff that came out of it not, it being made on the fly. There was a period of time where I wrote it on Monday and we shot it on Wednesday. I mean, wow. It was that chaotic. But there was a lot of heroes in that movie. I mean, from Will and Martin, who were enormous helps, to Tay Leone. Tay Leone with the studio did not want to cast, and we pretty much cast behind their back, because she was funny, and she was willing to jump on without a script, and got Christian Wagner, who cut it, and I can't say enough about Jerry Bruckheimer. He's a post-production. A lot of people don't know what he's good at. He's a post-production, on top of everything else, but he's a post-production genius.
Huh.
His ability to take, crap and kind of say, yeah, but we can do this and that with it, and turn it into something else. And I saw him do that quite a few times.
Mm-hmm. Were there reshoots and rewrites after you guys had wrapped?
There were just a couple of reshoots afterward, mainly with stuff that we just couldn't. One to replace a scene that just got botched, and another a couple of pickup shots for stuff that just was missed because it was a really tight budget and a tight schedule. And that film was made for $20 million. Mm-hmm. And then the opening sequence was never locked down, and that was a reshoot.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I've always wondered, and I've heard this, do guys like Will Smith, do they have like a dialogue guy that comes in and sort of, spruces up his dialogue in a script like that, or does he ad-lib some of it? Because it seems like a lot of these movies have, and no offense to your dialogue writing, but they seem to have a real Will Smith flair to them. Is it you capturing his voice, or is it him ad-libbing? Is it him bringing in one of his own writers?
At that point, it wasn't bringing in his own writers. I don't know what Will does now. I mean, I'm sure Will has favorite guys who work with him now. That movie, Will was actually a real champion. Will was willing to try a lot on that movie. I would give him stuff to do, and no matter what I gave him to do, he would try. And Martin, on the other hand, wasn't quite as willing to try stuff. But we had 3 days of rehearsal, where half the rehearsal was because the script wasn't written. Here's the situation. Let's you know, and Will and Martin would just sort of roll with it.
Uh-huh.
And a couple things would get thrown in, and I'd furious. I mean, Will's a great actor and funny, but Martin is incredibly funny.
Uh-huh.
You know, being a former stand-up, and
Mm-hmm.
I would be furiously writing, and we recorded every one on audio, and they couldn't afford they couldn't afford an assistant for me. So there was one period of time, because I wanted the rehearsals transcribed so I could just start taking some of those golden moments and sticking them in the script. I didn't want to forget some of those things that I'd heard that was great. There was one moment when I had to transcribe. For a period of time, I was transcribing the tapes myself.
Huh.
And Lucas Foster walks in my office, and I had the tape going, and I was typing on my computer, and I said, what is this? What is it that you see right now? And Lucas said, I don't know. And I said, the most expensive stenographer in all of Miami.
Huh.
And a little light bulb went off where he went, uh-oh. And I had an assistant within an hour.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, those are great movies. Everyone thinks, you know, filmmaking is such this glamorous profession. And hearing those little nuggets, because that's at the end of the day, there's so many of those moments that are not nearly as glamorous as people think.
No, they're not. And the hours were really incredible, and that film was really crazy. But back to your question about will and dialogue. A lot of it came from rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it comes from me listening. You know, I think if a writer's got actors that are good with dialogue, you got to listen. Martin, you really had to listen to, because Martin had issues with, you know, Martin had a few vocal issues with not being able to wrap his mouth around certain phrases and sentences. So I had to write a certain way for Martin. You know, I had to make things and give him room. And there were some moments when they would go off the page that were good, and some moments that were really bad when they would go off the page. As it is with all actors, and Michael would sometimes let them go off the page way too far, and to the point where we didn't have a scene at the end, because we were, again, some of that movie's held together with you know, gaffer tape. So if this line of dialogue is not in the scene, you know, we don't have anywhere to go next.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple of moments when those got left. Those were, and a couple of those were things that we had to go in and reshoot. We had to just pick up that one shot and line of dialogue so we could get on.
Yeah. Huh.
So,
it does sound amazing that it came together so well.
It did. And some of it was because there wasn't any studio meddling. Don at one point ordered us not to talk to anybody at the studio. The studio called, you know, don't answer the phone. Don't, you know, because they didn't know the movie. They were afraid of the film we were making.
Mm-hmm.
But there were some great casting choices. We were able to, you know, cast Michael Imperioli and I forget the name of the other guy, the guy who plays Chet the doorman. But both those guys had great audition tapes and great improvisations. And when they showed up in Miami, when I saw Michael Imperioli, I said to him, just so you know, when you get your sides tomorrow, don't be shocked if there's a lot of your audition that's in, you know, in those words, because, you know, if it was funny, it made the script.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael did a couple of funny bits in his tape, and I stuck them right in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, at that point you can't be precious. It's just, if it's funny and works, let it go.
Mm-hmm. So let's just take a step back and just, you know, both Die Hard 2 and Bad Boys, they have other writers credited. And again, we don't need to get into the specifics of what you thought of this guy or thought of that guy, but I'm curious how. Well, the goal of
it is part of the process. It is a huge part of the nuts and bolts process of writing in Hollywood. You will be rewritten.
Mm-hmm.
and lots of times it will not be fun for you.
Mm-hmm.
So put on your steel jockstrap.
Yeah. So, and how did you take it? I mean, it sounds like with Bad Boys, at least, I mean, you're on the set. So at what point do they bring in another writer after you?
Well, they didn't bring anyone in after me.
I see. That was all the writers.
So to speak. I was the last guy
okay.
on the movie, so to speak. There was some girl dialogue that was, some stuff that was written. Michael Bay wanted this girl,
I see.
one girl, Carol Wolfer, who I became good friends with, to write some stuff. They called it Julie dialogue. Not that I was having any issues or problems writing stuff for Ted, but so I was the last guy of the party. But you see, while I was writing in Miami, writing Bad Boys for Columbia, the same studio and executive were rewriting and prepping Money Train with another writer. They fired me. And, they hadn't fired me. Joe Rubin had fired me. And moved. So while I'm fixed on the last guy on one of their movies, I'm the first guy on the film that they're about to start shooting any day now while I'm on Bad Boys. So that was kind of weird. And actually, there were some scenes in Bad Boys that made it into Money Train.
Huh.
This was really funny.
Uh-huh. So when you use a word like firing, it's such a harsh, confrontational word. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, you're a professional, they're a professional, and you understand that it's a firing, but it's just you're being released from a project and you're...
No, they're firing you. They're not being released from a project. They're done with you and they're moving on.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're nice and they say, we think you're written out, or we may come back to you later, but the director wants this guy who we worked on his last film with to do this and this and this. It's all bull. Mm-hmm. It's not, they're moving on from you.
When they fire...
A lot of reasons which are probably not good,
mm-hmm.
and not right, but they're going to move on anyway. They're
mm-hmm.
generally moving on because they don't know how to push the script forward. And it's very easy for them to change writers.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes change to someone else who, they're throwing stuff against the wall and seeing if it fits.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in the corporate world, when you get fired, they're not going to rehire you, and you're probably never going to work with those people again. Do you feel like these are as confrontational as that? Relationships are soured. These people that fire you, you'll never work with them again. They genuinely don't think you're a good writer, or they just legitimately think you're just not a good writer for this specific project.
Well, sometimes they're firing you. Well, oftentimes you're not being fired because let's just be really fair and frank. Sometimes you're being replaced because you're not good. You're not getting the job done
mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. Okay, they want to go in another direction. The director sees something in his head that you're not getting. An actor wants, someone who won an Academy Award to write the next draft because it makes him feel as if he or she feels as if they're more special. There's all these ridiculous reasons why you're replaced. Some of which have nothing to do with whether or not you're a good writer. Other times, as I've replaced other writers on movies, there's some really terribly written scripts, and writers need to be replaced. But a lot of that is a matter of opinion and a matter of art.
Mm-hmm.
But that's why sometimes relationships are soured over depending upon how they fire you. Sometimes relationships are, you truly know it's like The Godfather. It's just business,
mm-hmm.
and they do come back to you, or that studio comes back to you. Like I said, I was in a spot with Columbia where I'm saving one movie after they fired me on another.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously the studio knew I had to leave Money Train I left Money Train because of the circumstances that were involved with moving it forward. Well, for them, they thought they needed to as they said, find someone who's better suited to writing a movie to best. I forgot the word. It was a great wording. It escapes me now. But essentially, to best serve the Woody Wesley relationship that was in White Men Can't Jump. Mm-hmm. And that was not the movie I wrote or developed. It wasn't an action comedy at all. It was it was much darker, more intense thriller. And once they got Woody and Wesley, they wanted to go in another direction. Mm-hmm. So they removed me for that. But when it came to who to bring in for Bad Boys, I was obviously available and, still approved. Mm-hmm. Things are a bit different today. They are a bit different today. I think they're more circumspect and more scared than ever, where if you didn't deliver, they're so risk averse driven. If they feel like you didn't deliver before, they wouldn't want to hire you again.
Mm-hmm. And when you say they, you're talking about the studio executives and the producers.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with how good you are. It has to do with, since they don't, you're dealing with a lot of people right now who don't know good from bad. Mm-hmm. And as you can tell by the films that are made and the amount of writers that work on movies and whatever, if you don't know what is really good from bad, all you can do is go by what was successful for you and what was not. So, if this writer got me that actor, he must be a good writer. It's not, I read it and realized by looking at the work, he's a good writer. Mm-hmm. The way it is now is, that got me, that character, whatever. The guy who wrote The Last Pass is the guy who wrote The Last Pass that Leo DiCaprio said, oh, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, you're awesome to the studio. Mm-hmm. And it's not about how good you are anymore.
Yeah. So let's jump ahead a little bit to the movie Hostage. It sounds like Die Hard 2 was kind of a loose adaptation, but Hostage was adapted from a novel. Are there some sort of tips, and maybe you could talk a little bit about your process of adapting a novel into a screenplay?
I can't say there's any tips for adapting a novel into a screenplay, specifically for me. Whether it's loosely adapted or faithfully adapted, it's what's going to make the best movie. I think obviously if you're adapting a pop culture phenomenon, if you're adapting Twilight, if you're adapting Hunger Games, you better be close to it as best you can, or else you risk alienating an audience. I think that's very obvious. When it came to Hostage, Hostage was in some ways not unlike Bad Boys, where I came to it very late. I was supposed to do a small amount of work on it, and I ended up spending a year of my life on the movie for a whole lot of different political reasons, mostly having to do with the director and the star. I'd done a lot of work with Bruce, and Bruce wanted me, and I did the favor to work on the movie with Bruce, for Bruce. But the director and I ended up having a relationship in such a way where we saw the same movie and suddenly we were on the same movie for a long, long time. That movie that we saw was what Hostage became. How it steered or didn't steer closely to and from the book wasn't a thought in our head at that time. It just had to do with, this is the movie we see, this is where we're going to go with it, and hopefully everyone else will want to go in that direction. So, which I think how most adaptations should be. I look at any adaptation like I would an original. What's the best movie? Here. You know, I think most writers aren't looking necessarily to be faithful to the work. And as an author myself, I know that sounds like it. I'm, you know, blaspheming that I don't think a screenwriter should feel like he has to steer close to the work or not. Mm-hmm. Except again in those large pop cultural crimes, you got to make the best movie you possibly can. Mm-hmm. And I think if a writer doesn't see that or know that, you know, I adapted my movie, didn't get made, my second novel, True Believers, for the screen, and with Hideo Nakata in mind to direct. And I spent a lot of time with Hideo Nakata, and I probably was more merciless with my work than I think anyone else would have been.
Huh.
I mean, the movie version was very different from the book. So much so my wife, you know, who was not, you know, who's a big fan of mine, but didn't think it was my best novel, read the screenplay and she says, well, that should have been the book.
Huh.
You know.
And maybe you could give us an example of so you made whole story changes, to the screenplay, and I mean, it seems like as a screenwriter, even though you're writing a novel, you would kind of be aware of sort of this cinematic vision, but you're saying there were things that just didn't work.
One of the wonderful things about writing novels is when you're writing a book, you are not constrained by, well, in a movie, I probably have to do this. Mm-hmm. Or in a movie, the studio would make you do this. Or in a movie, the movie star would never do this. And they'd want a movie star for this part, so you have to have this scene. You know, I mean, in a book, you're not constrained by those unwritten, you know, parameters. So, was very aware when I was writing the book that I wouldn't, if this were adapted into a movie, I probably wouldn't go there. You know, that was entirely my choice in writing True Believers. And when I wrote, and I also adapted my first novel, which didn't get made, for Fox. And I was pretty true to it. But when I was writing that book, I felt the movie would be similar to the book too. But the second book, I felt like I was able to really go for a much bigger canvas in a book that I didn't think a movie would contain. And so when I really wrote the movie down and changed the point of view, that then attracted Hideo Nakata. And then Hideo, you know, encouraged me, and we followed that route even further, you know, even more acutely away from my book. And frankly, it was a lot of fun because I'd already written the book. You know, it may have not been, had the movie been made and people would have ended up reading the novel based on the movie, I may have disappointed. It might have been disappointing to people, but as a writer, it was really fun to take that story that I'd written before and take it different places than I thought before. Mm-hmm.
So what is your goal by writing these novels? You've obviously adapted a bunch of them. You want to create an income stream as a novelist? You want to get known as a novelist? What's sort of your goal with them?
Yes, an income stream would be nice. That's a good thing, always to get paid and paying the mortgage and paying for private school and stuff that you have to, and getting known. But the primary reason to write novels is there's a difference between writing books and screenplays. There's, you know, movies are this very collaborative. God knows how many times you've heard of this before. But if you're going through the process beyond what you write as a spec, if it becomes, you know, if it gets bought, if a producer picks it up, you're going to get notes. Now more people are involved. You know, if it heads towards production, you've got other people who are coming on. You've got directors. You've got actors. You've got practical situations, as in budget, as in locations, as in, we were gonna make the movie in New York, but now we have to rewrite it to shoot it in North Carolina because of the tax thing. That's a reality. Writers have to live with that. Mm-hmm. So the further you go down the road with a screenplay, you find out how really truly collaborative it is and how facile you need to be as a writer to serve those needs while hopefully continuing to serve the script and your story. That's taxing as a writer. It's really, it's hard work. It's rewarding work if the film turns out, but it's hard work. And another part of screenwriting, you're writing for an audience that isn't necessarily reading your script for enjoyment. They're reading it trying to kind of figure out if it's going to be a movie, or if I want to play this part, or if I want to invest in it, or if there's your audience is coming at it for so many different reasons other than entertainment. There's a calculation that goes into their reads. That's your audience as a screenwriter, which is fine. Well, a book, your audience, you have a direct relationship with your audience. It's not a collaboration. What you write is yours. It is yours alone. It's not going to get rewritten. It's not going to, it's not going to be, changed by locations or movie stars or, it's yours. And again, it's a direct link to the audience. Your audience is reading it to be entertained. Mm-hmm. And that's why I write books.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of some people
just for my soul.
Mm-hmm. I've heard of people making some good money writing Kindle books. Are you finding that you're getting some decent sales through Kindle Marketplace?
I am. It's just not. It's the indie book market now. Because my first two books were through traditional publishers, but that business model is not working anymore, especially for genre writers. So it's being your own publisher. It's a slow build. I can't say there's a lot of money in it to put my kids through private school and stuff. So I'm very happy that I still work, in entertainment. As my first book agent said, don't quit your day job till you're on the New York Times bestseller list. Mm-hmm. And then a year later when he called me and said, "Where's the damn book?" And I said, "I thought you said don't quit my day job." Mm-hmm. So that said, it's a slow growth thing. My last book sells better than my next book, and I'm creating a series and stuff. So it's a bit of an experiment, but it's extraordinarily rewarding and incredibly addictive having worked with publishers, to be your own publisher, to make your own deadlines, to not have massive amounts of lead time between delivering this draft to go to galleries, to go to wherever, for then being 8 months out before you actually get a pub date. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of addictive. I don't really know how I feel about going back to a publisher right now.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, like I said, it's primarily for the soul. As a writer, as a screenwriter, your audience is your agent, your manager, the producer, the studio, and they don't send you, if they get really moved by a script, yeah, you might get a phone call, you might get an attaboy, but there's notes. When your book is done, and you get fan mail, you get someone who says, that book really moved me, it was great, I love it, when's the next book, what else can I read, do you recommend? That's writing.
They're not telling you to change the ending.
Well, they're not telling you to change the ending, but they're also telling you they're reading because they want to be entertained,
Mm-hmm.
and they're reading because that's your book because that's what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, your agent isn't necessarily reading your script because that's what he wants to do. He's reading your script hoping it's going to make him a pile of money.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the producer, same with the studio, same with whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole different, you know, perspective to sit down, you know, and read with. And the second they're done, it's on to the next script on top of the pile.
Mm-hmm.
There's no time to relish it. Book readers, they relish it, you know, and
Mm-hmm.
it's, you know, that you can't put a price tag on.
Sure. So, Doug, you've been very generous with your time. Maybe we'll just end here with a couple Oscar predictions. Do you have any favorite films from this past year?
No.
No.
There's a lot of films I like. I have not seen all of them. I still have the screeners in my backpack
Okay.
for a few films that I haven't seen. I really loved American Hustle.
Huh.
For a lot of reasons. I know a lot of people
I haven't seen that
didn't
one.
like it. I really loved it. You know, it's a sneaky movie as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a con movie. It's a con man film. You know, it's just a con man film.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows you that it's not a genre film. It's all about execution. And that movie is all about execution. That's why I love it. And there's, you know, but there's predictions, you know, unless I'm in an Oscar pool and there's money on it, or it's a friend of mine who's being nominated, I really don't give a rip.
Uh-huh.
You know, I think it's a really long, boring TV show, and it's a wonderful marketing scheme for a lot of studios. And by the way, and if it weren't for Oscar, let me tell you, a lot of certain films wouldn't get made.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's their only chance at making money in this market.
Yeah.
Pray to God, you know, 12 Years a Slave is not going to get made unless they're thinking maybe they'll get an Oscar
Mm-hmm.
for the film. Because if it doesn't get an Oscar nomination, it doesn't make money.
Yeah.
So that's what I think of the Oscars. That's what I like about them.
Yep. So it doesn't sound like you saw Gravity?
Oh, I did.
Okay. I thought it was one of the best movies of all time. I thought it was just absolutely thoroughly entertaining.
Oh, massively entertaining, breathtaking in, not only that, I'm not a big IMAX fan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just because I'm one of those people who can get, you know, 3D IMAX, I can get dizzy, and I walk out of that movie telling everybody, see it in IMAX. You must see it in IMAX 3D. You've never seen anything like it before. It's full of great work.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's kind of a mediocre screenplay,
Mm-hmm.
As far as writing goes. But filming, holy Toledo.
Yeah.
What the vision that went into making, just to figure out how to make that film is mind-numbing.
Mm-hmm.
So I loved Gravity and really enjoyed it. You know, at the end of the day, I'm still a big movie fan.
Mm-hmm.
I like watching movies. I like when the lights go down in the theater. Usually now it's my home theater, but I still really treasure that time, and I like really good work. And there's been a lot of good work and a lot of good performances this year, but nothing I want to. I just don't invest in the award-worthiness of it because I'm always disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did that movie win? Why did that wasn't as good as that and whatever?
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's not really what seeing films is about.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's a big marketing engine for a lot of these films. I saw Nebraska, and that's another one of these examples. I don't think Nebraska really would stand a chance with an audience if it doesn't get that sort of publicity from the Oscar nomination.
And then boom, look what happened.
Yeah.
I look at you just look at the numbers for these films, and you kind of say, wow, that really did get a pop. It did get a boost. You can imagine that movie getting getting made. I am personally far more attracted and interested in what's going on TV right now, in basic and premium cable. There's such incredible writing going on, and great acting and great directing. I can't wait. Well, I can wait. I'm really annoyed that there's only 2 episodes left of True Detective, which I just think is just loaded with great work.
I'll have to check it out. I have not watched that one yet.
It is it's wonderful, and I hate that it's going to end, and I just burned through House of Cards a couple weeks ago, which is just phenomenal. And so as a writer, TV is definitely, I think, where the better work's being done right now. Some of it's in movies, but mostly it's in TV. Mad Men. There's another show that drives me out of my skull because it's so friggin' depressing and dark. But my dad was an ad man. And a lot of it hits a lot of buttons in me because I sort of feel like I grew up, in some of it. And I think it's as depressing as it is. It's so incredibly unique as a television show. And the characters are so incredibly unique.
Yeah.
And moving. So yeah, I can, we can do 10 podcasts.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So
talking about 3 great TV shows because there's so much good work in them.
Yeah. Now everyone says we're in a golden age of television, and I think it's pretty clear we are. So yeah, there's some phenomenal stuff going on. Well, Doug, as I said,
it's only going to get better now with some of these new platforms. With the Netflixes and the Amazons finding new ways. A writer never had a chance. Okay, as a novelist, you sort of understand this. Okay, but because you get that person, you want that person to want to read your book and read it from beginning to end. Okay, well, a screenwriter's never had a chance at that. And now in the age of binge viewing, which which I'll do from time to time, it's amazing that a writer has a chance to work in the long form like that and develop these long, beautiful arcs and have people watch it from beginning to end in a matter of days. People used to do that on LSD. Now you can do it on Netflix because you can walk away from watching 12 hours of TV and be utterly disoriented, but in a good way.
So, Doug, as I said, you've been very generous with your time. We'll definitely have to have you on again. Maybe there'll be some specific TV shows we can dive into.
I'll just talk about that.
Yeah, that would be good. So, as I said, Doug, I really appreciate this. I think we got some good information and some good tips for writers. It's been a pleasure having you on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad we could finally pull it together.
I just want to make a quick announcement about my upcoming class. I'm going to be running an online class called How to Make the Opening Pages of Your Screenplay Awesome. It's going to be at 10 a.m. on Saturday, April 19th. I'll be dissecting the opening pages of 5 great screenplays and pulling out some great lessons from them. The screenplays I'll be using are Natural Born Killers, Lethal Weapon, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Legally Blonde, and The Shawshank Redemption. The screenplays are all available in the SYS script library, which is at www.sellingyourscreenplay.com/library, so you can take a look at those before the class. Also, as a bonus, for anyone who signs up for this class and attends the live version, I will personally read the opening few pages of your screenplay and give you a verbal critique during the class. Just make sure you send me your pages at least by Wednesday, April 16th, so I have plenty of time to read them and make some notes on them. We'll see how your pages stack up against the produced screenplays that we'll be reviewing. So if you'd like to hear what I have to say about some of your pages, this is a great way to do that. Check out sellingyourscreenplay.com/classes to learn more about the class and sign up. If you're listening to this after the class has taken place, no problem. I record all the classes and you can view them at your leisure by joining SYS Select. To learn more about that, go to www.sellingyourscreenplayselect.com. In the next episode of the Selling Your Screenplay podcast, I will be interviewing Franklin Leonard. He's the founder of The Blacklist and the new Blacklist website. This is definitely a marketing channel that all screenwriters should be considering. I'm using it myself with some of my screenplays, and I really dove in with Franklin about how to use the site and how to get the most out of it. So keep an eye out for that interview. So in today's writing words section, I wanted to reflect on how Doug got his break and first job as a screenwriter. As I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, this method of cold calling agents definitely can still work. You just have to have a good phone presence and be able to chat people up over the phone. I also like the idea of going down and delivering the screenplay, although I'm not sure that's really going to make a lot of sense considering most agents will want a PDF version of the screenplay. But if an agent does request a hard copy, which does still happen, hand delivering it is probably a smart idea. But you've got to be outgoing and feel comfortable in this sort of setting. The great thing about the world we live in today is that there are so many ways to break in. Doug's way is just one way. I've certainly talked about many others on this podcast and will continue to talk about more too. I had an email correspondence with a screenwriter this past week who went to the Austin Film Festival last year. If you haven't heard of the Austin Film Festival, it's a very screenwriter-centric festival. They have a script contest, and he said that if you get even to the level of second rounder, which I guess is the top 10%, you'll get a huge price break and free access to many events. People are always asking me if contests are worth doing, and this is a good example where you've got a reasonable chance at getting some tangible value out of the contest entry. Even if you don't win, there's still a decent chance that you'll at least earn a discount to the festival. He was able to make some nice connections at the festival, so if you're planning on going, you should think about entering the script contest. It might help you get a discount. The regular deadline is April 30th and the late deadline is May 30th, so there is still some time. The actual festival takes place in October. I'll link to this in the show notes. The reason I mentioned this in the writing words section right after talking about Doug Richardson and how he broke into the business is because this is just another way for you to get out there and market your material. And it's a hell of a fun way too. If you go to the festival, you'll probably have a blast. I'm never going to know about every single way you could potentially market your screenplay, so just keep your eyes open and look for opportunities. If you do find any, please do let me know so I can share them on the podcast. So that's our show. Thanks for listening.